In the first Railway series book, The Three Railway Engines, written by series creator and writer Reverend Wilbert Awdry, we are introduced to three main staples of the franchise: Edward, Gordon, and Henry. It was also in the same book we are introduced to other characters. Two of them were blue engines. One was between a green and red engine, another was beside Gordon and Edward. These two were known as number 87546 and 98462. They were seen in the first story of the Three Railway Engines, Edward's Day Out, where they are two of the big engines who put poor Edward down due to being bigger and stronger than him.
They were all bigger than Edward and boasted about it. They said, "The driver won't choose you again. He wants big, strong engines like us."
Yet, they are also some of the few we don't know a whole lot about. So, in this video, I'll be looking into what is known about them in the official canon lore of the Railway series, using resources like the Thomas the Tank Engine Man book, the book that goes over Awdry's life, and the IOS book, or Anasorter, Its People, Histories, and Railways, which is written by Awdry himself. I will also share any speculations and theories I and many other creators have come up with regarding these two, and use them to try and piece together what I think their story was within the Railway series. Now, before I actually get into it, for the sake of knowing who's who, I'm gonna say the one on the left is 87546, and the one next to Gordon is 98462. In this illustration, and in this illustration. Now, I do this as the way this line goes in the passage phrase sounds like it's going from left to right when mentioning 87546 and 98462. So I'll do it like that. Now, no matter how easy they are to say in their numbers or how much they stuck, I will not refer to them as any fan names like Alfred or Croven, as you'll see later in this video that that's not what they're officially called in the official lore. So officially, I'll refer to them by their numbers. Now that's done, let's get into the video. In the Railway series, we know they appear in Edward's Day Out, which takes place in 1923, so they were around by that year, but for the longest time, not much was really known about them, other than they were two of the 5 engines that were bigger and stronger than Edward. It was only when a kid from New Zealand named Ross wrote a letter to Awdry asking about them, was when Wilbert wrote back to him, providing an explanation. He had explained that the two were engines that were sent to the factory director for trials on the NWR, but the two turned out to be very horrid, spiteful, and mean to Edward, Gordon, James, and Henry, making them unpleasant for the 4 to be around. As a result, the factory director sent them back to the owners, which was the reasoning no stories were written about them. With the mention of them being rude to James implies they were still around by 1925, which is the year he'd arrived on the NWR, meaning they stayed long enough to interact with him in the very manner that got them sent away. One could argue that at the time, Awdry was referring to the red engine in Edward's Day Out as James, which I kinda get. He only figured out the timeline by 1987 when he released the iOS book. And he did write that letter back in 1963, which was 24 years before the book's publication. However, because the timeline is solved today, this officially cannot be James, as he officially arrived 2 years after Edward's Day Out, so I don't think that's the case. I'm also surprised there's little mention to how they were to Thomas, whether they were rude or nice to him, but I'll get to that in the theorizing aspect of the video, as there have been some answers, including some of my own, that kinda do explain this. And that's it. Even though Awdry provided some explanation about the two, he never mentioned what railway the two originated from, or what their bases were, or what specific date they were sent away, which makes them really obscure. Throughout the books, we see more blue engines in the background. 3 blue engines were in the pages of Thomas the Tank Engine, 1, or I guess 2, in Troublesome Engines, and another in Henry the Green Engine. However, it's not been confirmed if these engines in these specific illustrations are in fact 98462 or 87546. However, I can definitely see the engine in this illustration in the story Thomas and Gordon being either 2, as well with this illustration. However, it could be either Gordon or even Henry, who at this time and even after this book, was depicted in the blue livery he gained from the free railway engines. Now, it could be argued that either candidate is not plausible for this specific engine, as he is shown to have an 060 wheel configuration. However, this is an illustration created by C. Reginald Dolby, and during his time for illustrating for the books, was infamous for making mistakes, like in Pain Pots and Queens, where in this illustration, he depicted James as a 460 when he's actually a 260, and also when at times he kept changing Henry's wheel configuration during his old shape between a 460 and a 462. So I'm going to ignore that factor, given Dolby's history. As for these ones, here's how I see them. I honestly think this one is meant to be Edward. These two are supposed to be Gordon Henry, but illustrated wrong. And the last one could be Edward or some other engine, maybe one that was sent over the cover for Henry while he was away at crew. And that's about it, really. When Awdry explained who 87546 and 98462 were, he gave the two blue engines 5-digit numbers that were rather odd, since we know the two were around by 1923. Yet these numbers don't seem like numbers that would exist in that time period, and almost sound adjacent to BR numbers. So, why did he give them such numbers? What's the purpose? Let's have a look. Some have theorized that the numbers were meant to hint at what their bases were. An example of this is when they theorized that 98462's number hints that the character is actually an S69, later an LNER B12, and that the number he has is a TOPS number. However, no real-life S69 ever held that number, since if we look at their number ranges, on the GER, their numbers ranged from 1500 to 1570. On the LNER, it was between 8500 to 8580. Then looking at the years of BR, was between 61500 and 61580. Not only that, he and 87546 were around by 1923, and TOPS numbers were being implemented around the 1970s. So I'm gonna say no to that. So why give them such bizarre numbers? What do their numbers indicate? Well, it's very likely they don't have any real meaning. However, I have come up with my own takeaway on this, albeit with some help from a friend of mine, Mega Fire Rider. Back in 2024, when me and him were having one of our discussions regarding the two, he pointed out that the fact Awdry quite arbitrarily went with 98462 and 87546 as their numbers really goes to show how much he didn't care about these background NPC one-offs, which really goes to show how insignificant they really were in the grand scheme of things. They weren't meant to be remembered. Goes to show how insignificant they were in the grand scheme of things. They weren't meant to be remembered. This sentence was when I was thinking about these two, and it's then looking at the letter is where I began to come to this conclusion that I think makes a lot of sense. Not only were the numbers designed to make them forgettable, but it also likely signifies that they're so insignificant in the grand scheme of things that there's no point in mentioning what their names were. Really showing how in the end, like 199, like Class 40, they were just entities of a faceless crowd with nothing unique to them at all, and were engines that were just there at one point and were gone by the next. This is where I get into theories and ideas that people have come up with and just discuss them. I will also be sharing my thoughts and adding some theories of my own into the mix as we go. So let's do it by first going over some theories that fans have shared in this community post I have made, where I asked them to provide theories they have come up with regarding 98462 and 87546. I will also be using this community post as well, as it's also related to theories about the two, and here's what they provided. The majority under the post have theorized that both engines originate from territories of the LNER, such as the Great Eastern, Northeastern, Great Central, and Great Northern Railways, which is a common theory and depiction for the two loaned engines. Some have also commonly theorized that 87546 is a southern design, from being a southeastern Chatham Railway River or K-class to being from the LBS-CR like Thomas, while very few have suggested that they came from Scottish railways like the Caledonian and Highland Railways. Moving away from the community posts, in the story Edward's Day Out, we see a coach at the front missing its coupling. Even though this was likely an illustration error, Awdry explained in one of his letters that this was due to one of the larger engines handling them roughly. Nick Train 123 would come up with the idea that 98462 was the one who caused the coupling on the coach to snap, with it being a potential reason he and Gordon didn't get along. Now, while it's not confirmed that he or 87546 caused the coupling to snap off, it is possible that one of them did in fact do it, and it could add to why they were sent away, which was due to their poor handling of rolling stock. We don't know when the two either arrived or left, but there is a chance they likely arrived around the 1920s before 1923, which is possible since the locomotive crisis was happening on the NWR in the early 20s, so they could have arrived before 1923, or even arrived in 1923 with Gordon, since the iOS book does state that by that year, some of the furnace and Midland stock had to be returned, but replacements were found. So perhaps these two were potentially those replacements, maybe? With fans saying they arrived before or by 1923, lasting up to at least 1925 or 1935. Honestly, I'm open to them arriving in 1923, but I feel like 1921 to 1922 does work for them. It really makes sense to me that Hat would get these two onto the railway when offered for trial, or maybe these two arrived like separately, with one arriving before 1923 and the other by that year. I also think 1925 is a suitable year for the two to be sent back, since with the arrival of James, as James's purchase could be a contributing factor to why they were sent away. I think there was a thread on Twitter where some users suggested that the only engine the two were nice or really weren't rude to was Thomas, since the letter didn't list him as one of the few engines that they were rude to. I guess it's possible, but honestly, I don't see it. I think the only reason it wasn't said that they were rude to Thomas is because they likely didn't take much notice of him. I think to them, he was just too small to even bother with. Despite Awdry not giving the two an actual basis, in this section, I thought I'd go over potential candidates for them and decide what I think they could have been, on a personal level, of course. Which is funny, since for the longest time, I didn't think they could. At first, it was due to the illustrations, but it's been debunked that they were inaccurate according to Awdry. But then it came down to their numbers, which didn't sound like they belonged to any real-life locomotive to me. To me, they sound as if they were experimental, freelance even. However, now knowing that the numbers don't really hold much weight, I'm now more open to them having a basis, but only through a set of rules I've made for myself. First off, I will not take the illustrations into account, as Dolby's illustrations tend to have inconsistencies, which led to Awdry having to make up stories to explain them, as well as him having a headache about it. Also combined with him not really caring much for the books, even saying that these books will die out eventually, I have no logical reason to really take his work into consideration. The only thing I will take seriously is their positionings, which I have dispelled upon them earlier in this video. Second, the railways and regions I will pick candidates out of will be the London and Northwestern, the Northeastern, the Caledonian, the Furness Railway, the Great Western, the Railway Operations Division, the Great Northern, and Great Central Railways. The first picks was due to the fact when looking at these maps, both the labeled one and the non-labeled one, and we say Sodor is here, as per the lore, between Columbia, England, and the Isle of Man, we can see that the Northeastern, Caledonian, and London and Northwestern were actually close to Sodor in terms of proximity. And it makes sense, before 1923, how it would have looked to nearby regions beside the Furness and Midland Railways. Speaking of the Furness Railway, I will also be choosing candidates from that railway, since they're literally next door to Sodor. Being once an apprentice at Swindon, which is the works of the GWR, it's likely Topham had made some connections there, which could lead to him being able to loan some engines from the GWR. Much like how William Stanier was able to borrow the plans of the GWR King class when designing his Princess Royal Pacific. The Railway Operations Division have sold off many of their ROD 280s to companies like the Great Central, London Northwestern, and the Great Western Railways, even loaning them to the Great Western during the First World War. So perhaps in the early 1920s, the NWO could have gotten some ROD 280s loaned to help them getting on their feet. As for the Great Central and Great Northern, given Hat managed to purchase Gordon, GNR A1 Pacific, who definitely would have been in the GNR region of the LNER, perhaps by 1923, by the time the LNER is formed, some engines from those regions could have been loaned off to the Northwestern Railway due to poor performance or being non-standard standard like Gordon. Now, I originally did consider any locomotive bases from the LBSCR as potential candidates for either two, being that when Hat was contacting them to purchase Thomas, it's possible he managed to make some connections to them to at least have a few engines loaned from them. Eventually, I decided to cut them out. I personally don't think they would have loaned any engines to the NWR, whether it be their Atlantics or Baltics, especially after Lawson Billington introduced new classes like the K, E2, and L classes. It's when the weight of the work on the LBSC was lifted. Some people might be shocked that I didn't include the GER, since that's the railway the well-known S69, later LNER Class B12 originated from. Well, here's my reasoning. As cool as it is for B12 to be loaned before or even by 1923 and start in the Northwestern Railway's blue livery, the region they were in was too far from where Sodor is, and I don't really think Hat would have gone that far when looking for engines to loan out or purchase. I also don't think the GER or even the newly formed LNER would give away such a locomotive class like this, whose performance is solid and was still needed on the GER main line to haul express trains, at least up to 1928 when the B-17s took those duties away from them. While I like them, and I get why a lot of people would probably choose this for 98462, I just don't see it being loaned off to the NWR before or even by 1923, unless of course they were being loaned by the time the B-17s were taking away their express duties. Third, the bases I will be choosing as potential candidates are going to be those that existed and were in fact built between 1900 and 1922. Since Edwards's Out takes place in 1923, and the two were indeed around that time, there would have been locomotive classes that did and were already made by 1923. This means classes that were built or designed after 1923 will not be chosen as potential candidates. Fuck you, B-787546! And the final rule is, these are simply just my choices and my opinions. If you disagree, by all means, go ahead. That is not the problem at all. Alright, with the rules set, now focusing on the candidates, we got popular choices like the NER S3, later LNER B16, a popular choice for 98462 for many fans. Then there's poor steamers, such as the NER Class S2 and Caledonian Railway 956 class, both of which were poor steamers. The 956s were caused by droughting in the valve gear, and the S2 is due to being handled by inexperienced crews, plus its firebox grate. There's also the Great Central Railway Robinson 8C and Class 1s, which, while elegant, suffer from a shallow firebox, and the Class 1 suffer from its steam passages and the boiler being insufficient with the cylinders. These classes' faults with steam could be a catalyst for them being loaned off. However, for the Great Central locomotives, I'd say 1923 is a suitable year for them to be loaned, since that's the year Hat would have gotten Gordon from the GNR region, and at the time, he could have gotten some GCR locomotives that the LNR were concerned having back. And as Great Central designs, either 98462 and 87546 could be the one who have given Gordon the most hardest time, since the Great Central's chief mechanical engineer John George Robinson declined the offer to become the CME of the LNER, and instead nominated Gresley. I like to imagine that either 98462 and 87546 could see it as Gresley stealing what was Robinson's future, despite Robinson being close to retirement. Same could also apply if either one were the proposed 462 by Robinson, which is alleged to have been designed back in 1911 and have the same issue as the 8Cs and Class 1s. And given we have prototypes like Gordon exist, perhaps it was built by 1921 for the upcoming LNER, like Rexel Jet's take on 98462. There's the Caledonian 60 class and the Furnace 115 class. The 60 class, despite the robust free steaming and meant for passenger work, were quite sluggish due to unsophisticated design and were deployed more on goods services. And the 115 Baltics, the only inside cylinder 464Ts, which were okay locomotives, and could have been on loan to help with the NWR's locomotive crisis, since some of the furnace stock were still loaned to the Northwestern Railway. By the end of the First World War, the ROD might have loaned their 280s to the NWR, which is possible given they loaned and sold them off to other companies like the GWR and LNWR, so I don't think it'd be different for the Northwestern Railway. Then there's the Great Western Saint, which, given their bad behavior, would be interesting to see them act the opposite of what a saint is. Then there's average yet mediocre performers like the Raven A2 and the LNWR Clotten classes, which both are powerful but have their own faults, with the A2 consuming more coal than the Grizzly A1, which led to it not becoming the Pacific that Grizzly would standardize on, plus its length being longer than the A1's, which caused issues with its route availability. As an A2, either 98462 or 87546 could have had a dynamic where they were very antagonistic to Gordon, much like if they were GCR locomotives, but due to the fact one of their own was beaten by their competition, the A1s and later the A3s, Gordon's brothers. Then there's the Clotten cylinder not being optimal, and its heavy weight leading to mediocre performance on the track, which much like the 956s, 8Cs, and Class 1s could have been the reason for both bad behavior and to be loaned to the Northwestern Railway. Then there's the Great Northern locomotive that the LNER could have loaned in 1923, the O2 prototype, number 461, and GNR 1300. Given 461 was a unique, physical, non-standard prototype, a part that looks separate from its production members, as well as 1300 being a one-off, plus having a narrow firebox, these factors could be a reason for them to be loaned off by the LNER. So what are my final picks? Well, originally I considered my picks for 98462 and 87546 to be a Raven A2 built in 1922 and the proposed Robinson Pacific built in 1921 for the upcoming LNER, who would arrive on trial on the NWR with Gordon in 1923 and en route to the other engines, especially Gordon himself. And these picks seem pretty solid, but then I kind of threw it out the window as I finally decided what my picks for the two were. My pick is that 98462 is an LNWR Clotten numbered 186 who arrived on the NWR in 1922 to help the locomotive crisis, and 87546 is a Great Central Robinson Class 1 number 426 who arrived in 1923 alongside Gordon as one of the replacements for the returned Midland and Furnace stock. Since them being unreliable designs could add to the fact they are another pair of bad bargains that Hat has made aside from Henry. That and along with their poor behavior. 98462 and 87546 are the living epitome of insignificance and unimportance through the meaningless numbers, the fact that they were once there and left. Kinda like the people we are with for a temporary amount of time, but by that time is up, they are no longer around. Despite how obscure they are, they end up stirring conversation due to how not everything is known about them in terms of where they came from or what their basis was, and with the possibilities being endless with the two. Some might say they wish the two were fully explored, but honestly, I'm kinda glad they aren't, since we wouldn't have as many possibilities, ideas, and theories regarding the two, and at the end of the day, whether we know about them or not, it's clear that both of them don't matter, but left a lasting curiosity we'll probably never have satisfied.